I want to welcome you to one of the most remarkable journeys you will ever take. Come and join me as we walk the corridors of the mythological dragons and beasts of St. John's Revelation. During the 3rd century after the crucifixion of Christ, the powerful bishops and Arians came into debate on the floor of Constantinople under the guardianship of Constantine. Constantine was a Christian king, and he wanted a nation that was not divided. Thus, at the end of the debate, the Arians lost and their work was relegated to the Dark Ages. The bishops, however, knowing that humanity was illiterate, that they thought the world was the center of the universe, felt that the secret teachings of Christianity could not be given. To quote one of the early bishops, it would be like giving a weapon into the hands of a child. Among these secret teachings was the mysteries of St. John's Revelation. A new age has dawned now, and for the first time in the history of the manuscript, every single symbol will be broken and every mystery will be revealed to you. I am your hostess, Elizabeth MacDonald Burrows. Hello, and we are nearing the final episodes of Odyssey of the Apocalypse. Thank you for being with me again today. I thought before we continued with the work that we would go back to a poem that we were reading, I think it was 2 or 3 or 4 weeks ago, a poem that was written by St. John of the Cross, who was one of the great saints who had passed through the crucifixion of the soul or the resurrection of the dead. And if you remember the poem, this is the soul. He's talking about the soul and how it is prepared to become the bride of the Christ, and how the soul and the Christ dwell in the garden of God until it's called into the holy marriage. I thought maybe we would go back to that poem as an opener because it's so exquisitely beautiful, and of course we touch such a small amount of it. We'll only touch a small amount more, I'm afraid. It's unlikely we'll get to the end of it. But God is sitting up in heaven in where we left off. He's sitting there, and he is the Father, and of course the indwelling Christ is his Son. And he now says to the soul and the indwelling Christ that they have come to harmony. So he said, "And so let it be then," said the Father, "for your love deserves it." And as soon as this was said, earth came into existence, which so much signifies the descent of the soul with the Christ to dwell together in embodiment to matter. A palace he built for the bride, designed with love and wisdom, divided into 2 quarters, one high and one low. The lower was built with infinite variety, while the higher was covered with precious stones shining with beauty. Of course, what he is writing about is our lower nature, that part of the soul, and the Christ who is enmeshed in the world of matter. And that the higher is that part of the soul and the Christ, which forever lives in infinity or in heaven. We can assume that when he is talking about the beautiful stones, he's talking about the stars that we see at night. So that the bride might know the bridegroom she had married, in the higher one he placed the angelic hierarchy, and all humans were given the power of the lower part to inhabit, for the human condition is of less worth than angelic. Though beings in places he divided in this matter, all formed one single body of the bride just betrothed. For the love of one single bridegroom, one bride made of them those above enjoyed, the bridegroom in gladness and in song. So as the soul dwelled, that part of the soul that dwelled in heaven, which has never been completely submerged into the world of matter, knows that the bridegroom is that of the indwelling Christ and sings in joyful gladness and song, as do the angels. And then it said, but those below had hope in him through the faith he bestowed. Meaning that below, that part of the soul bound by the lesser world, did not possibly know, or could not possibly know, that it had a higher self, and that inevitably sometime its destiny would prescribe that it would leave earth, develop its wings, and fly to heaven, and would raise their low condition to a much higher grade, so that no one could despise it as base. For he would become in everything equal to them. He would descend among them and live among them. And that is what he has done through our journey through matter, this great light which God created out of himself, which is the light of consciousness, and his Son has dwelt in us since the beginning of time. And he would remain, and the next verse says it so exquisitely beautiful, and he would remain among them forever till the end of this cycle, until the end of time. Meaning that the soul would never journey alone, not in matter, not in heaven, not in eternity. They would march together in joy, in eternal melody, for he is the head and the crown of the bride he found. He would grace all the just with her beauty, for they are the body of the bride he was about to embrace. In his arms tenderly, and there he would give her his love, and together return as one to the home of the Father. There the same joy God enjoys would be her delight, for as the Father and the Son and the one proceeding from them, each one in the other dwells, thus the bride would live in joy, absorbed forever in God, living the life of God. Which takes us just about to the place where we left off on the Apocalypse. I believe that we were on chapter 20 and on verse 9. And we had titled chapter 20, The Second Death. Remember, we said that the second death is as the soul and her husband or her betrothed, the Christ, came to dwell in the world of matter. This was the first death, because they died of a heavenly abode, to journey through the cycles of necessity, the world of matter. Now, in the second death, the bride and the bridegroom come together, and they seek now to come to oneness and return to the heavenly abode, therefore leaving the earthly abode or dying of the corporeal ways and attachments. The second death, also known as the first resurrection. The first resurrection being that of the resurrection of the dead, ascending from the world of matter. And it talked about that in verse 9, and I think we left off probably with the footnote in which was went along with this part of it, which was the holy city, because the holy city represents the purification of the soul. We're going to find that the Foursquare Church actually signifies the purified soul united in oneness with the Christ embodiment. But we'll see this, of course, in chapter 21. So we had talked about that the holy city was not really a specific location, but was more the union of God and man, to where God then dwelled. In other words, heaven and earth do become one. If you remember the words Jerusalem, we don't ascend there. The new Jerusalem descends. We're caught also, I think, in a part of that Lord's Prayer, which, Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. So the prayer that we've been praying for centuries in our churches, we have asked for heaven to come to church. We have asked for heaven to come to earth because we want to live in peace and joy and harmony upon earth. So in the prayer, this is what we ask for. So then we ask, let us not be led into temptation. That is, of course, first century Aramaic, because we're normally accustomed to the Lord's Prayer saying, lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from all evil. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory. But in first century Aramaic, it says, let us not be led into temptation. And of course, God does not lead us into temptation, and we don't want to be led into temptation. But that was not the part of the Lord's Prayer that I wanted to bring to you. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Verse 9, and they went up on the breadth of earth. I think we have to start a little bit. It talked about the time when 1,000 years were expired and Satan would be loosed out of his prison. And so that meant that we talked about this last week. 1,000 represent the body, soul, and spirit returning to oneness. And after they have returned to oneness or reached the unitive state, perhaps not yet liberated, as comes in the very final chapters of Revelation, but they are ascending now to God and shall rule over the lesser nature. Because we cannot destroy what we are. That part that we know is our earthly being must serve as an instrument for both the soul and the indwelling Christ to fulfill the mission of the Christ, which is the perfection of our planet. And perfection means more than everybody just being on a religious binge or concerned with their spirituality. It means that we must have perfect law, perfect music, perfect science. And I take back, we are interested, of course, in dedicated to the progression of our spiritual qualities. But we are saying that we cannot expect everyone to manifest as a great spiritual teacher or a great healer, because we have need of perfect law, perfect government. We have need of perfect accounting. We have need of perfect art and music. So each of us will manifest the perfection of earth in just a little bit differently, in our own unique way. That is what will make the perfect earth. Thus the Christ encapsulated in all of us. He is fragmented because a part of him is in each of us, and a part of him, that part of him that is in us, will bring us upward to fulfill the purpose which we have been designed to fulfill. So thus, we can only expect earth to be perfect when this great consciousness rules over every man, woman, and child. So it is simply saying, too, that the ways, and shall go out to deceive nations which are in the four quarters of the earth. And we're talking about the four elements, all of which has been bound by the four elements to create matter. And Gog and Magog shall gather them together in battle, the number of whom is as the sands of the sea. And they went up to the breadth of earth and encompassed the camp of the saints above. And the beloved city, and fire came down from God out of heaven and devoured them. And of course we talked about that the Ezekiel prophecy that touched on Gog and Magog, and to show you that it said exactly the same thing, that this was the end times as the divine nature came forth in mankind, that Ezekiel was defining in his great prophecy and vision. So now we know that whatever is left, They went up, the breath of earth encompassed the camp of saints in the beloved city, and fire came down, meaning purification came down to purify the last remnants of the vagrancies of the soul. And the devil that deceived them was cast into a lake of fire and brimstone, where the beast and false prophet are, and shall be tormented day and night forever. And that almost sounds like there would be some that might be chosen people, and as a result they wouldn't have to be cast into this lake of fire, because the people that's going to be cast in will, of course, be tormented forever and ever. Of course, that's not what it means at all. We've talked about that the Christ dwells in all people. So it means that the ego, which has deceived the soul into following the way of self-will, which is the false prophet, and also which fed the mind, which is the major part of the beast. And so it is simply saying that here the mind has been subdued, and self-will has been subdued, and now at last the ego is cast into this for the final and last purification. And the reason it suffers, of course, day and night forever and ever is because the bride, the soul, and the bridegroom, the Christ, shall rule over the lesser nature forever and ever. That means the lesser nature, or the dragon and self-will and the mind, must forever answer the holy couple, which now as one, and we can say they must answer forever to God and shall never have rulership again. And I saw a great white throne, which represents, of course, spirituality, something which has been purified and is white as snow. And him that sat on it, from whose face the earth and heaven fled away, and there was found no place for them. And this is none other than our beloved Heavenly Father, who appears upon a great throne and welcomes his Son and his bride to the kingdom of heaven. And I saw the dead, small and great, stand before God, and the books were open, and another book was open, which was the book of life. And the dead were judged out of those things which were written in the books according to their works. This should be quite clear to us now, because we covered this very similarly, a very similar situation in the very beginning of the Apocalypse. And it happens that when it talks about a book being open, this is that book of life, and in which the divine reads and see what the soul has yet left in it that is unlearned. So now the books are opened. I saw the dead, small and great, and dead means those unawakened who have not yet reached the illumined state of mind, who have not yet passed through the resurrection of the dead. So he saw the dead, both small and great, and to me this is the greatest of comfort as we wander through the world and we see murder and crime and drugs and alcohol and the things that bring us so much heartache, to think that every single human being will overcome these things, and that one day they will not exist upon our earth, is the greatest promise and consolation that we could ever have. So I saw the dead, small and great, stand before God, and the books were opened, and another book was opened, which was the book of life, and the dead were judged out of those things which were written in the books according to their works. I think I mentioned this when we were on had the subject before, but I remember it so well that I used to meditate upon God every single day, and I chose him as a master because I had analyzed all of the great masters, meaning one who has passed through the resurrection of the dead. And I'd found, whether it was in the world of music or art or science or religion, they had one commonality, and that was God. And particularly the great spiritual teachers like Moses and Zarathustra, and certainly Jesus the Christ or Gautama Buddha. All these had one singular commonality. They were all taught by the one master, by God. So I chose God as my master teacher, and every day in meditation I would go up to God, and for some reason he always seemed to be sleeping, and I understand now that that is the state that he had been in through my journey through the corporeal world. And so I would just sit there. I was satisfied. No one told me that it was not within my right to visit God, that I had to be holy and righteous and pure and do thousands of hours of prayer before I had a right to approach God. Because I had no one to tell me this, I had no problem in approaching him, because I was searching for him. I wanted to see him more than anything else in the world. And so now at last I'd found the tool of meditation, and every day at the same time I could go there and visit with him. So always he was asleep, and I just sat down by the foot of his bed. I just sat there and had a very precious 30 minutes, 40 minutes, hour and a half, whatever it was, being in his presence. And then one day I went into meditation, and I went up, and he was awake, and he was sitting in a chair reading a book. And I asked him, "What are you reading?" He said, "I'm reading the book on your life, Elizabeth." I asked him then, "Well, what, may I read it?" And he said very firmly, "No, you may not." I know now, of course, what that book of life is, because that divine part of myself, that part of God, was seeing the unlearned lessons, setting in motion, or preparing to set in motion, all of the tasks that would have to be done in order to learn the unlearned lessons, and also any atonement that had to be made would now be made. And he would set in motion the circumstances which would make this possible. And you may think that you have lived a very perfect life, but I'm afraid we all have a few skeletons in the closet. I remember during this time I had, long before, 25 years before, I had borrowed $25 from friends, and as I traveled, I'd left a box of things at their place worth far more than the $25, which they used. And so I never felt the necessity to pay back the $25. And they never asked for it. But now, as I started in the throes of the Great War, I had to pay the $25 back. I remember writing a letter with it and saying, "You may be surprised and you may not understand, but it is necessary that I repay you the $25 that I borrowed from you." Because there was no peace in the soul. Again and again and again it was brought to my attention that I owed this $25. So as the months passed in the throes of the great and remarkable battle, I was able to work out not only the unlearned lessons, but every indebtedness that he deemed that I owed anyone. Not just money indebtedness, but kindness. I had to make friends with all of my enemies, because that was not allowed in the kingdom of heaven. So you're in for if you have not yet passed through this, you're in for a wonderful adventure. And that is exactly what it means when he says he opens the book and reads, and that the dead are judged, those unawakened, judged out of those things which are written in the books, according to their works. It isn't all bad. We've also done good. And the sea gave up the dead. And remember, this is the mind. And all the things that we have forgotten about, all of it has come now to the surface. All the sea gave up the dead which were in it, and death and hell delivered up their dead which were in them. All of the things that have frightened us, terrified us, made us afraid, these things are all brought out so they can be destroyed. And in fact, by this time, much of it has been destroyed. But remember, the ego itself is in the final throes now. And death and hell were cast into the lake of fire. So all of this was cast into the fires of purification. All the things that have frightened us, and death and dying, and all the misconcepts we have, everything has been now placed into this great lake of fire to be burned and destroyed. So they will never again haunt us. So that we'll never again fear death or old age. That we will never again suffer loneliness. I don't know what loneliness is. I used to be so lonely, and then I met God walking on my path, or else He found me walking on His, I guess. I've never known loneliness since then, or lack of fulfillment, or lack of challenge, nor lack of growth, or an opportunity to learn. And whosoever was not written in the book of life was cast into the lake of fire, meaning everyone who is not awakened will have the opportunity to pass through the resurrection of the dead. And not just an opportunity, it will be a command performance, for no one can escape the resurrection of the dead, nor would they want to, because in it rests heaven and peace, happiness, joy. Well, that concludes our chapter 20. And now we prepare for, I suppose this is probably my very favorite chapter. I'm sure it is yours also. There are so many beautiful words in chapter 21 that to go on to chapter 22 afterwards almost seems incongruous, but John wrote everything for a particular reason. And I reached the conclusion that even though I thought he should have stopped at chapter 21, he had a reason for stopping at chapter 22. So we will go on, but this is my very favorite chapter, and these are my very favorite words, and I'm sure they're yours also. And God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes, and there shall be no more death, nor sorrow, nor crying, neither shall there be any more pain, for the former things are passed away. Of course, that's Revelation 21, verse 4. We'll be hearing that again very shortly. I call this the final curtain. The great masterpiece of John the Beloved opens its final pages with the soul's ultimate victory over matter and the prophecy of a new world yet to come. Although there remains one more chapter in Odyssey, it is this one which truly encompasses the nucleus and the glory of Revelation. John does not disappoint the world with a flat, simplified finale, but writes in a manner which would appeal to the world's greatest composers or playwrights. He creates ecstasy and impatience. That's what I felt as I got ready to write this final chapter. Ecstasy, joy, and impatience. Because ecstasy, because everyone who opens the pages of his genius will know that one day they will enter a New Jerusalem. And if I have accomplished one single thing out there, it is my hope that I have made you aware of the fact that the illumined consciousness is the consciousness of our future world, that you will pass through the resurrection of the dead. You will enter this very special final epoch of creation, and that you will enter the New Jerusalem. Even if you are the most hardened criminal watching this show, I promise you will still enter one day the New Jerusalem, when all atonement has been paid, and when the book of life can close its pages. of course, impatience because the fulfillment of the covenant lies ahead in the ever-evolving maturity of the human race. And once you know that it's going to be, we want it tomorrow, we want it today. And yet we are thousands of years away from the culmination of every man, woman, and child completing this progression. So we have ahead of us work to be done, that we shall work together. And I know you would want that. Whatever way that we can best serve, we will work together till everyone has made it. I choose to do that. I like to think you choose it. And I like to think that you'll begin by making everyone's day just a little better tomorrow. And that you will keep that in mind, and you'll make everyone's day just a little better after tomorrow, forever. That you will kind of curtail your anger and hostilities and seek to be polite and understanding, and to hold out a hand to help those that war in darkness. All of us must work together. This task cannot be done by a single person, nor has it ever been done by a single person. The door has been opened, but nevertheless, we all must step through the doorway. The symbolism in 21 is, of course, massive in a different way. It took hours and hours and hours of research work to put together this chapter. Yes, John was there. Yes, John gave me all of the major keys. But to put it all together and to be able to understand it at the level of consciousness which John understood it required both time and patience. So as we approach this chapter, I think that I want to say here, now that the indwelling Christ has been raised and has wrought a glorious victory on the battlefield of transformation, he will unite the soul in holy marriage. St. John of the Cross describes this spiritual marriage thusly: the soul has entered this state because it has detached itself from all temporal and natural things. When the soul has lived for some time as the bride of the Son in perfect and sweet love, God calls it and leads it into his flourishing garden for the celebration of the spiritual marriage. The two natures are so united, that which is divine so communicated to that which is human, that without undergoing any essential change, each seems to be God. As a new heaven and earth are born through oneness with the indwelling Christ, the first heaven and first earth pass away, for these have been subject to human idealism and have bound the soul to death, old age, and pain, and the hardships of human life. From this moment on, the soul will dwell in heavenly estate, although still in human embodiment, and be one with God forever. Revelation 21:7 reveals the mystique of this transformation when God says, "He that overcometh shall inherit all things, and I will be his God, and he shall be my son." Thus we go to the first verse of chapter 21. "And I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth were passed away, and there was no more sea." There was, in other words, no more subconscious mind. Psychology often defines the three levels of the mind as the conscious, subconscious, and superconscious. Thus it would be that God is the superconscious. The subconscious is that sea that houses the memory patterns since the beginning of time. And the conscious mind, that which functions in the day-to-day activity. Now, he is saying, there isn't any more sea. For all of the deep regions of the subconscious has been purified. And when there is no subconscious, superconscious and conscious become one. Thus God and man are one. And the world as we knew it has passed away. We mentioned this already as we kind of read the preparation of this chapter, that death, old age, fears, lack of fulfillment, all the things that we have associated with the human world as we understand it today, we see through different eyes. We have entered a new, almost dimension in time, in which we not only dwell in the human world, but in the world of the angels simultaneously. As you know, I've mentioned several times that communicating with the world of angels is as natural as drinking a glass of water, that we come to a point where we live in the world, but we're not of it. So the first world, the new heaven and new earth, has come, and the first heaven and earth have passed away. And I, John, and I just can imagine the ecstasy that John felt when he saw the holy city, the New Jerusalem, coming down from God out of heaven, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And in this case, I think he was not only thinking of the soul, but I think he was perceiving Jerusalem itself, when every man, woman, and child would have reached this illumined state, and a whole new Jerusalem would descend. You must remember that Jerusalem was the Queen City in those days, and even to this day, Jerusalem is such a holy place for the Muslims, for the Jewish, for the Christians. And I'm sure that John's sentiment toward this great city was strong and powerful, that he loved it as we might love our country. And now God has sent him a vision to tell him that one day there won't be any war in Jerusalem any longer. And John was shown what Jerusalem would be in the thousands of years ahead. And that Jerusalem was the personification of what the world would be. I can understand this vision because I remember seeing mankind, all of mankind over all of earth, what it would be like one day, what we would be like. And I remember when I saw it, I cried, thinking that this is really going to happen. This is our world of tomorrow, a world of peace and love and, well, anyway. And I heard a great voice out of heaven saying, "Behold, the tabernacle of God is with men, and he will dwell with them, and they shall be his people, and God himself shall be with them, and be their God." You need not wait for the whole world to reach this great stage, because this state of consciousness happens to each person individually. Once they have completed the resurrection of the dead, God is joined in union with them forever and ever, so that we can hear his voice and that we are guided and we feel his presence as we journey through the great world of matter, and that he dwells with us. Imagine having God of the 150 billion galaxies, your guide, your teacher, to live and to dwell with each of us, collectively, individually. And God shall wipe away all the tears from their eyes, and there shall be no more death, neither sorrow, nor crying, neither shall there be any more pain, for the former things are passed away. And he that sat upon the throne said, Behold, I make all things new. And he said to me, Write, for these are the words of the true and faithful. So he told John, now is the time to write, for this is the truth. And there was no doubt that John knew that his work would live through the hundreds of years. And he said to me, it is done. I am Alpha and Omega. I am the beginning and I am the end. I will give unto him who is athirst of the fountain of the water of life freely. He that overcometh shall inherit all things, and I will be his God, and he shall be my son. And thus it was, the great masters of antiquity and music and art and science who achieved this state with God were watched over by him, taught by him, and their greatness lives on in the pages of history and literature and science and philosophy and religion. And you too will have your greatness on the winds of time. But the fearful, the unbelieving, and the abominable, and the murderers and warmongers and sorcerers and idolaters and all liars shall have their part in the lake, which burns with fire and brimstone, which is the second death. We now fully well understand what the second death is, and it's saying that if we are fearful of making this journey and we are unbelieving of it, and we continue to be attached to our worldly ways, then we continue to suffer. But at the same time, we won't get away with it, because they too will have their time in the second death. Said they shall have their part in the lake of fire. And there came unto me one of the seven angels, and with some careful work I determined that this was the seventh angel who poured out the seven vials. And it said, there came unto me one of the seven angels, which had the seven vials full of seven last plagues, and talked to me, saying, Come hither, and I will show you the bride, the Lamb's wife. And he carried me away into spirit to a great and high mountain. We've talked about what this means, that to a high state of consciousness, where John, in cosmic consciousness, transcendent consciousness, would perceive the future. He said, and he showed me the great city, the holy Jerusalem, descending out of heaven from God. And that gives us, too, a very important key, because it said descending out of heaven from God. And it had the glory of God. And her light was like unto a stone most precious, even like a jasper stone, clear as crystal. A jasper stone is a kind of an opaque, impenetrable stone. It was used in the Hebrew breastplate, and it represents a kind of victory, that which, once victory is achieved, nothing can penetrate it. So we could say this in the way I saw it. John saw it as the New Jerusalem. And now I'm going to just replace the word slightly, that you might experience how I saw it when I was given the vision of eternity. And he carried me away into the Spirit, into a great and high mountain, and showed me the world, the holy world, descending out of heaven from God, having the glory of God. And her light was like a stone most precious, even as a jasper stone, clear as crystal. And had a wall great and high, and had 12 gates, and at the gates 12 angels, and the names written thereon, which are the names of the 12 tribes of the children of Israel. I am going to have to go to the blackboard now, and this is tremendously difficult to explain so that we can understand it, and I'm not sure the drawing helps that much, but we will try to do it. The reason John uses the 12 tribes of Israel is because Moses, being the central core of the religion as it was known in those times. Remember, Moses was the Hebrew leader, of course, that is considered the founder of Jewish law or Jewish religion. And so that all of the Jewish people follow not only God, as Moses stated, but also they study intensely the laws of Moses. So we might look at Moses almost like a sun, S-U-N, like a sun in the sky, which has all of the planets going around it in an orbital pattern, or like this perhaps, but the planets going around an orbital pattern. So Moses would have oriented the heads of the 12 tribes, and this is probably going to be a rather poor drawing, but I'm going to try it anyway. Maybe I can do it better this way. Almost like spokes of the wheel. I have to have 12 of them, of course, because we need to have room for 12 tribes. This one didn't come out very even. So we can say that here was the 12 tribes, the head of the 12 tribes. And to each one of the heads of the 12 tribes would be assigned a parcel of land. This is prior to the time they came to the Promised Land, because Moses laid out the sections of land that each one of the leaders of the 12 tribes would have. Now the leaders would be in charge of those people who was within their domain, and they would raise them up into a spiritual unity with God and, of course, with the law. And in this way, there would be, the country of Israel would become a nation under one God. And so when John uses the 12 tribes, he is foreseeing the time when all of this spreads out, not only to encompass what would become the nation of Israel, but would work in the same manner over all of earth. In fact, Jesus with his 12 disciples was like adding a layer to this, in which each one of the apostles were initiated into the very mysteries that we have been discussing all these weeks. And they would go out then and train and teach and bring people unto them. And again, that light would spread out further and further. And Jesus covered not just the nation of Israel, but 1/6 of the human population, because Christianity now takes 1/6 or 1 billion people, and that's a great number. So the light has spread out even further, even though they may not be illumined, even though they may be unknowing of what the resurrection of the dead even means. They have still taken a first step on the path. And we're not saying that others have not. It's just simply that Jesus has more followers than any other religion of the world at this time. But each one has done the same thing. Those that followed Gautama Buddha went out with greater truths, began to encompass their part of the country. In India, it began to encompass their part of the country. And ultimately, these great leaders would bring the entire world into this fold. So we have here, it said that we have 12 gates, and the only way that I'm going to be able to draw this is in a square. Remember, this represents the 4 elements, but it is different now because the 4 elements before represented the cross, the bondage which bound the soul to the world of matter. But if we were to join, let's take a look at these 4 elements one more time, like earth, and of course we have water, fire, and we have air. Thus it is that when the earthly nature has been purified by water, it becomes airborne. When the soul has been purified, which is bound to earth, has been purified by fire, it also becomes one in air or heaven. Thus it is that if we were to turn this around, we would have the square, signifying, of course, the four-square church, representing a soul which had mastered, which had become one in God, whose body had been purified by water and whose soul had been purified by fire. So the four-square church is the holy place that rests within the union of the Christ and the soul in every individual. So we know that there's a wall around it, and we'll draw the wall a little later, but it had 12 gates, and it's going to take time here to draw 12 little gates, but there's 3 on each side. And so we're getting there. We're half finished. Now we will try 3 more, and 3 more, and then we will have 12 gates. These have a tremendous meaning, these 12 gates, because we now have the 4 elements, and one side of the gate represents the north, which is death and dying. One part represents the east, which is new birth. One represents the south, which is, of course, as we've talked about, is the maturity or growth, development of our soul and humanity. And then, of course, we have the west, which signifies aging and maturity as it prepares for to enter into death and into rebirth. These were designated then, of course, by the at the gates, and had 12 gates, and at the gates 12 angels. So there was an angel that ruled over each one of these, and they had upon them the name of the 12 tribes of Israel. I'm going to sit down now to touch for a moment the fact that these stones that we're going to run into that are part of the gate that goes around the holy city represents 12 initiations or progressions that signify the completion or the total format of the resurrection of the dead. We will be able to take every single gateway here that is governed or directed by one of the 12 tribes of Israel, and we will show you how it correlates with every single stone that represents a layer in the foundation of the holy city. And we're going to look at everything the soul has undergone to become the bride of the Christ, the victories that have been won by this holy team now who has entered into the New Jerusalem. I am caught at this moment, perhaps not wanting to go too deeply because we are running out of time, and that's why I have to leave us at this point. But I'm caught with a book that was written a long time ago by a woman named Mabel Collins, and there are 2 lines which have haunted me throughout the years, and it says, "Thou shalt not stand in the presence of masters until your feet have been washed in the blood of your own heart. And thou shalt not speak in the presence of masters till your tongue has lost the power to wound." And I know that because there is good in each and every one of us, and because God dwells in us, the Christ, that we have within us the power to follow the 3 simple rules: to think good thoughts, to speak kind words, and to do good deeds. Thank you for being with me. I'll see you next week as we journey into the Holy City, the New Jerusalem. In the meantime, the God in me bows to the God in you. And may heaven walk with you all week.